First item on work session is discussion regarding Westlake Academy 2021 Master Building Plan. Troy?
Yes, Mayor and Council, this is a follow-up from the October 3rd meeting. As you guys recalled, we talked a little bit about master planning in that meeting, and one of the follow-ups was for Bennett Partners and the head of school, Sean Wilson, to get together and give him an update on kind of the historical perspective of master planning on the campus. And so we've done that, and we've created, out of that meeting, we've created several scenarios, which they're going to present tonight. And Mr. Bennett with Bennett Partners will also give you kind of a brief history of what they've worked on over the past several years as well. So I'll turn it over to Michael Bennett and let him pull up his slide. And Jason, I think you've got a slide to pull up.
Good afternoon, guys. I obviously didn't get the memo on the close today, so apologies for that. No, I'm privileged to have been working with you guys for a little over 20 years on different projects here, starting when I was in New York. And we won a competition against a couple of other architects to do work for you. So we did the first phase and did the first master plan way back when. So this first image that we're going to flip to here in a second. Am I controlling this?
Yes.
I am. I guess I am, aren't I? I didn't see that sitting there. This was our very first master plan that we did way back then. It will look very familiar to you. And we've done then maybe, I don't know, a half dozen updates of different sorts depending on the needs and the requests. And so this initial plan looked at building around the crest of the hill, but it also looked at having not only a lower school, a middle school, and an upper school, but it also looked in this case of having the town offices in that same location. That was the original idea, and the enrollment was much lower actually than it is today. I think when we started, the population of Westlake was some 240 people or something like that. So a lot's changed. And we've been there with you and have been pleased to be there with you to get you through these various things. But this plan looked at creating an environment where the kids were in touch with nature. The kids were in touch with what it means to be in Westlake, Texas, which meant preserving a lot of the trees. So we tried to preserve every tree that we could. It also looked at breaking the buildings up into smaller pieces and not like the giant facilities that you see in a lot of high schools or not only high schools, schools around generally. It looked at other principles like making sure every student had access to light, and so you'll see in all the subsequent phases that we've done, getting light into those spaces is an important thing. And then there were other criteria that were given to us. One is that wanted to keep the class sizes small, and so if memory serves me correct, we had one teacher per 22 students programmed for this. But it also looked at recognizing that you were going to grow places that you could grow. We did not assist you in the selection of the site. That was done way before we got here. We wish it had been bigger, and every master plan that we've subsequently done, we wish you had more space than you have today. But as you all well know, there's only so much real estate that exists in the world, and so we've continued to try to work with what we had. You see there on the left-hand side kind of a background of what we've done over the years. I'll say one of the things, too, that differentiated that first phase from the later phases was budget on the projects. We've built the spaces you needed with the money that you had, but they didn't always compare to what we originally did because the budgets were different. And so, but this plan reflects some work that we did for you. Really, it was more relative to sports fields and that sort of stuff, looking at what you would need for land and maybe having more sports associated with the school. And this work was done back in 2021. So that's a super brief overview kind of all we've done. And again, all these master plans that we've done were predicated on asking us to solve different problems, whether it be rapid growth of Westlake and how to accommodate more kids in the facility, or as I mentioned, sports or various other things. So it was good for us to have the opportunity to get with Sean and understand what his viewpoint was, what his and I think we've worked for probably 4 or maybe 5 heads of school in that process, and so and each one of them has kind of a different idea about how things should be done and how they want to do it. So it was good being able to get with Sean and talk about his priorities, and we've had a series of good sessions with him, and really have come up with several options that Emily Gilmore from my office is going to help me walk through now.
Thank you. So a couple of the other things, like Michael touched on, that we had looked at most recently. Back in 2020 and 2021, one of the specific goals that we were asked to evaluate at that time, like Michael mentioned, was related to available land as it relates to athletic fields. So at that time, we did look more specifically at two scenarios. The first was maintaining an existing six-man team, and so looking at the campus from that standpoint where we aren't looking at the growth of fields. And the second one was if it were to expand to an 11-man team. And what that meant. And obviously at that time, the thing that we most specifically looked at as well was the need to acquire additional land in order to achieve those goals. And so at that point, we looked at a higher level of evaluating what else we needed to be sure that there was space for on campus to ensure that the field growth, to look at what impact that was going to have on the academy overall. Then in 2021 and 2022, the goal kind of shifted a little bit in how we were viewing that, and that was to evaluate, like Michael said, the growth scenarios. And so in that case, we looked at 4 different scenarios, or really 5 different scenarios. Anything from maintaining the existing capacity that you have today, whether that was using the existing facilities you had with the existing modular classroom buildings or whether those got replaced. The second scenario was looking at eliminating those existing modular classrooms but not replacing them and looking at what impact that could have. And then the third scenario got into some of the additions that we're looking at, potential additions that we'll look at when we talk about scenarios today. And so those were most specifically the addition to the art and science, in addition to the PYP building, and then in addition to the secondary building as well. The scenario 4 was looking at just additions to the art and science and the secondary buildings and what impact that would have to the growth scenario. And then the last one was looking at just additions to art and science and PYP. And so when we got into those, it was really talking about where potential student growth was looked at and how that was going to impact where facilities would go. And that's really where it gets us to today. And like Michael mentioned, the 4 scenarios that we're looking at and have been diving a little bit deeper into. So with each of these, we kind of have the plans associated with those based on those different examples that we were just talking about. So today, scenario 1 would be replacing the older modular classrooms that are on campus. So there's the pros of that one is the funding is available. We still get the replacement of the older modular classrooms that are on campus today. And if ordered by the end of the year, I think Troy's looked into all this, that classrooms would be ready by August of 23. The cons that we've looked at from that standpoint is that modular buildings still remain as classrooms and that more challenging to meet the immediate needs for the art and science spaces that we've looked at solving through the addition to the art and science. So this is looking at...
So, sorry to interrupt. When you mention replacing the older buildings, are you talking about the 3 specific older ones of the 6? Are you talking about all 6 modular buildings?
I think you've looked at it from both standpoints.
Right, Dave. So it's replacing the 3 older ones closest to the arts and science building.
Right, okay.
Yep, that's what we're targeting for. Yes.
Yeah, we should say too, please don't hesitate to interrupt to ask questions.
And on those
Discussion
modular
about-
buildings, like if we would ever replace those with other modular buildings, is there a modular building you can recommend that fits with the concept you put forth about having lots of light, all the fire and safety, and the minimum code for safety protocols?
Yeah, I think the thing we've looked at and the thing we've done with other modular buildings is actually do some slight modifications to them. We can do additions on the outside to make them fit better and that sort of stuff. It's a little bit, it gets difficult if you do too many modifications because then they're becoming custom, and so it takes away some of the benefit of those modular buildings. Do I wish they had more windows in them? Yes, it'd be great to have more windows in them, but they are what they are, and like I said, we can do things to the outside of the buildings to make them feel better, and they function, except for Emily said, for specialized uses like art and science, they function pretty well as classrooms in our view, and they're safe. We wouldn't put them on your campus were they not safe.
Right. No, the current ones I see now, they're 23 years old now, I think, 22 years old, and they were bought used, I believe.
Okay.
And so they were installed in like 2010 or 11, I can remember.
That's about right.
And so they're past their life.
Yeah.
And no, everyone loves to have a permanent building, but permanent buildings, especially in this town, cost a lot, right?
This day, everywhere they cost a lot.
Yeah.
The other thing with those modulars too is getting like AC units that are not too loud, because one of the complaints we heard is that when the AC unit comes on, I can't hear.
Yeah.
So there are things like that that can be done.
Could you have like a remote unit that's not hooked into the wall?
You could do that. You could also have more distribution so that it distributes the air at more places so that it's a little bit quieter. There are multiple things. You can upgrade the unit a little bit. So there are things like that you can do to deal with the acoustic issue.
Sure.
So, Mayor, we'll get into the details of what's been proposed in the second half of the workshop as
Sure.
it relates to the portables, because we've anticipated some of those upgrades in that cost that you guys saw in your package.
Sure,
So,
yeah, I appreciate it.
Have y'all been to our portables recently?
I've been in your portables since right before COVID.
Okay.
Everything is like before and after COVID.
Yeah, that's the world we're in,
Last
isn't it?
time I was in
Yeah.
one of your portables.
Thank you.
Okay, so the scenario 2 that we've looked at is looking at the addition to the art and science. And so this meets the immediate needs for the art and science, and like we talked about, getting into really the specialized classroom needs for those spaces. Modular classrooms are not used as classrooms in this scenario, but the existing portables would still be available to be used as office or other storage needs. We've talked a lot about some of the other things on campus that really need more dedicated spaces that you don't have available today, and so those could serve that purpose. It adds 11 general classrooms, 2 art classrooms, and 3 science labs, and investing money into permanent buildings. The funding is not currently available. 2 years until construction would be completed, depending upon when that actually begins. It's a large addition near the main entry of the campus, so there's going to be impacts related to that. Because of the placement of that addition, there's existing water and sewer lines that have impacts that would need to be relocated. And then the general classrooms are placed a little bit away from where they ideally would be located. We've talked a lot about where the growth is anticipated within the academy, being more PYP based, and that's pulling those classrooms away from that, as well as from the secondary building as well. So this was the overall master plan that we had looked at in doing that. You can see that we have the art and science edition that's reflected there, and that has evolved a little bit as we've continued to evaluate that with your team. And so I did want to point out that we're including kind of the most latest version of that edition here within this, but in both the site plan as well as the proposed floor plans for each of those 2 stories of that addition. And so that one is most recently from this year.
And on these designs, I know you talked to Sean Wilson. Have you guys also gone down into like asking the teachers' input directly of those who sit in the arts and sciences and say, how does this look? How does it feel? Anything we miss?
So we did have actually, I think it was maybe Sean's first week when we started the more specific programming process with the art and science faculty. And so we did dive through all of those, went on some site visits to look more specifically at some of the challenges they're faced within existing spaces today, to really develop what that overall program is. That being said, the program for that specifically was based on the program we had discussed with the council at the time, and what was outlined for being included within those spaces. So the classroom counts and so forth were already set at that time, but programming the specific needs for all of the various classrooms, both art, science, and general purpose, was all kind of vetted, and we went through that process to make sure that what we were looking at was relevant to what is really needed for those spaces.
Okay.
One other observation too I'd like to throw out is and it's relative to safety, is that a permanent building is going to be safer for your students. If we're doing a permanent building, we're going to make what accommodation we can for things like storm shelter, and you're never going to get that in a modular building, as you guys well know. So it's not apples to apples from that standpoint either. It is safer to build one of these buildings for your children.
Right.
Yeah, and there were things through that process that, as we would expect, evolved from some of the initial schematic that we looked at when we were just talking kind of big picture space planning for what that building footprint could accommodate, but really looking into how workrooms and different things function for the purposes that would go within those spaces. So that's why you'll see that the floor plans and everything evolve from looking at them from a master planning standpoint to looking at them when we were doing programming specifically for those spaces.
I'll also say too, this addition at that location, it's big. It's a big footprint at that location in the campus. But it's if it's a solution that you need, we'll do our best to make that work.
And just for clarifying purposes, option 2, it's a brand new huge building to add classrooms and replace the old portables and fill out our art and science labs. And it's also including these brand new modular buildings, which are much higher quality than a typical portable, correct? Just wanted to make sure we're all clear on that for option 2.
I think on this one, at least when we have discussed it, was not necessarily replacing the one portion of portables. It was removing the portion of older portable classrooms, maintaining the newer portion of portable classrooms to be repurposed for non-classroom uses.
So we're going to keep the 3 newest, get rid of the 3 oldest, and build
Yes.
a permanent structure.
Yes, that is what we have been discussing.
Right, the initial intent was if we were not going to replace what's proposed in the second half of the workshop with new portables, that our goal was to get rid of the older ones, build the new 2-story arts and science building, so you're taking those classrooms from all 12 classrooms in the portables and moving them into the new 2-story A&S building. And then there was a lot of discussion as it related to what do we do with the old ones? Do we make it office space? Do we make it affiliate space? That type of thing. So that was never really a clear direction, but that was something we knew we wanted to get rid of. The goal at that time was to get rid of those older portables. And so now today we're talking about getting rid of the older portables and replacing them with new and potentially adding on to the A&S building. So
Okay.
there's just a few details.
So not buying any modular buildings in option 2.
Correct.
Okay. I understand now. Okay.
Financially, if that's the route we
Yeah.
can do.
We're
Okay.
just trying to get clarification. So scenario 2 is a permanent structure, get rid of 3 bad ones, keep the 3 newest. That's option 2.
That's it. Okay.
But the permanent building cost, have you done a better estimate on it now? Has it come down, or is it still like 18 million?
It's still going to be high.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you different. We're starting to see some things level off, but then we're starting to see supply chain issues on other things. Things like electrical panels are now a long lead time, which they weren't a while back. So my personal opinion is we still got another 6 or 9 months of that playing through before we know what it is. I've not seen, and having been through things like this a few times in my career, they're never going to go back down where they were.
Yeah.
They're going to stabilize and maybe be a little bit lower than they are, but I don't know that we're ever going to reset back down to numbers we had 3 years ago.
So, but, the expansion is like 20,000 square feet, right? And,
I think that's right. If this version, is that about right?
What's that, 900 square foot?
it's like 900 square foot.
Yeah.
Why are we so much higher? If you read online, like the average cost for school builds are between 400 and 500. And we're another 400 or 300 more than that.
Yeah.
Like, why are we already own the land.
Yeah.
Like, why is it that much
And
more?
usually that number doesn't include the land, but to answer your question is, and it goes back to something I said before, is these buildings are longer and skinnier for one thing, so you have more area of facade relative to the square footage that you build.
Okay.
So if you go to, I'll pick on Roanoke because they're close by and they've got a ginormous high school. You look at that thing and, yeah, every room has some glass in it, but those are big footprint buildings. And so you're able to save on that floor to skin ratio. You're also building a giant building at one slug. And we're building smaller bits. We're building 20,000 square feet where that thing may be 200,000 square feet.
Okay. So there's economies of scale.
There are economies of scale. There are a bunch of things that layer onto that. And we're going to work and Troy can tell you this, we're gonna work really hard with the contractor, because we'll bring them on early if we do this, to get every dollar out of that we can, and get a good number for you. And don't think as well, even if we bring the contractor on, it'll be what's called a construction manager at risk. And so the bidding is done at the subcontractor level and not at the contractor level, but it's still completely open book.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do everything we can to get that number to a point where it needs to be. But we're doing some work right now for All Saints in Fort Worth. We're at this exact same point, and we're having this exact same discussion because numbers are just crazy right now.
And so our cash on hand now is basically 7-8 million, is that what it is?
I believe it's around 6, a little over 6.
Right. And then, so we would have to write a bond for 12 in the future
Roughly, yes.
sometime. And then, and that would go into some future, I have to talk to our finance folks here. I can see her peeking up right now. I'm kidding.
Well, and not to get too speculative, but, there's a lot of monster home builders, national home builders that live in Westlake. I had a conversation with one of them, and he thinks that there's going to be about 900 supervisors that are going to be cut loose in Dallas-Fort Worth area. He thinks that because it's gone to a grinding halt on building residential. So if I had to bet, I agree with you. It's hard to ever go back, but I got a feeling it's going to be better to build in the next 2 years than it has been in the past 2 years.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and especially for home builders, because the one thing that has gone way back down because of the way it's bought and sold is wood.
Yep, you're right.
And so the wood numbers that we see, and we don't do as many things in wood, but the wood numbers that we see have gone way down. Unfortunately, buildings like this are too big to be able to do in wood, and it's also a quality thing. You're investing for a longer period of time.
Sure.
But that said, I do think numbers are going to come back down, but there has to be a little bit of pain.
I agree. Maybe 20%, 30% down, but
Yeah,
it's
I
never
think it'll
going
be
back.
something like that.
I think
Okay.
just to add on to what Michael was saying there's a couple other things about this particular scope we're looking at that also contributes to that cost per foot. Because these are more significantly science and art spaces, with science, there are additional utilities and safety things that we will have to incorporate within this space. So from a mechanical perspective, there's additional costs associated with the requirements of lab spaces. Those are always going to be more expensive. So if you're looking at the overall budget from, like Michael described, a more typical classroom setting, this is going to be looking at a higher cost to do the programs that we're talking about doing.
So you're talking
within
like
these spaces.
acid drains and stuff like that can handle all this stuff?
Additional ventilation that has to go
Yeah.
in. So yes, there's additional costs associated with the needs of this space. And then also, like we were talking about, kind of the footprint, one of the things we've talked a lot about in previous versions of this as well is because of the location of this addition being so central to the campus, to really make sure that the facade is addressed in a way that is going to complement the existing buildings. And so, even when we look at what the original cost of construction of the campus was, that was significantly higher than what a typical construction cost is going to be for another school. So when we were looking at this and initially pricing this out with the contractor who's doing the initial estimates for this, we were giving them that specific direction, and the renderings we were looking at that time were making sure that the stone, the materials, everything that was being used were well complementing the existing campus, the original campus buildings, because obviously we can look at it from a perspective, if you're looking for cost savings, but you're not going to end up with an aesthetic that is most similar to what is there today.
In my recollection, the original buildings were built for somewhere around $250 a square foot in 2002 and 3. And so I suspect if you escalated that, you may not be far off your number these days.
But I think even the original art and science is closer to what you're talking about, average dollar today for that, because that construction, even at that time, and the art and science doesn't have the same, quantity of stone and some of the other things that the initial campus buildings had on them included within that.
And you mentioned earlier about replacement of the portables. This is something that theoretically could be done prior to the start of the next school year. Just factoring in some of the supply chain constraints you mentioned earlier, what's your just best ballpark estimate of what a time frame for an arts and science expansion might look like?
I was going to say, we've talked about a 2-year construction schedule, but that is looking at the start of construction. At this point, where it's at would still need to go through the rest of the construction document process and permitting to be prepared for construction to begin.
Yeah, I would say somewhere, probably 18 months at a minimum, and 24 to 28 months, something like that.
You're saying
But
18
before
to
we
get
broke
it,
ground?
yeah, 18 before
No.
construction,
If we
or?
break- From our part, we would need maybe 4 to 6 months to be able to get you to break ground.
So if we said yes tonight, not that we're voting on that, but if we said yes tonight, you think 4 to 6 months and then 2 years after that?
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
reasonable. And I'm saying that.
So
the 2
two-
years,
2.5
you might-
years.
You might squeeze the 2 years down to 18 months.
Sure.
Depending on things.
I understand.
And we'd have to be really smart about thinking about what do we order today, because I mentioned electrical panels. It really throws a wrench in how we do all of our stuff, because you would normally think, I'm going to order electrical panels the
At
day
the end.
after you give us the okay to proceed. But we need to be thinking that way to be sure that we hold your schedule if that's what you choose to do.
And then in terms of just how the pricing mechanics work, you talked about locking in at this sub contractor level, not necessarily at the general contractor level. So if there were potential declines in prices over the next 2-year horizon, like what proportion could we theoretically benefit from if there was this 2.5-year process from
We
here?
definitely benefit from that, because what
Even
would
if we
happen-
started the process theoretically
Yeah, 'cause
today?
we wouldn't, I say we as the contractor, wouldn't lock in the subcontractor until after our drawings have been finished and he bids them out. So let's say we take 6 months to do our drawings, and then the contractor bids them out. We're at the end of, you may be bidding this out at the end of the summer of '23. So
Okay.
you would get the prices at the end of the summer in '23.
And how much of that project we locked in at that time, and how much is still a contingent?
You would lock it in at the.
All of it?
At that point, yeah.
Okay,
If
so
we
it'd be
had
a
all of our
fixed
drawings
price
finished-
turnkey at
Yeah.
that point, even at the general contractor level, all
Because you're
locked
locking
in?
it in with the sub.
Got it, okay.
And it's the advantage of that is it's a real open book process. We've seen the market go to that. Probably 95% of our projects are done that way, because you get the contractor on board early, so he works with us, and so you don't end up with a situation where we did something and then the contractor bid it different and we're all fighting about it, because he's there with us going through the process. Going in what his markup is going to be.
Yeah.
And so that's just one other thing that you go through and select when you select the contractor. You know what their various markups are going to be.
At what point would we be fully committed to the process? So let's just assume we get to end of summer next year, prices for some reason continue to escalate, financing may not be feasible, something happens. At what point are we locked into completing this?
You're not, well, in some ways, you're never locked in, but you could get all the design done, you could get the contractor to bid it out, and you could say, you know what, that's more money than we want to spend.
Okay.
We'll stop right there. You would have still spent the money, for the design part of things. But what we do is usually 7 or 8% of the total thing.
But once it's designed, bidded out, I mean, we have a pretty clear picture, and even if we sat for 6 months, it's not,
You're locked in. Once he's bid it out to the subcontractors, you then have a guaranteed maximum
Right.
price, is what it would be called.
right.
Even with that, contractors usually, and all of us are wise to save a little bit of contingency just because things happen. There may be water in the pier that you drilled, so you have to case the piers. There are things like that you don't know that happen, that we recommend you still save some contingency back for that. And in the end, if you get to the end and you haven't used it, you can buy nicer furniture, or you can, do upgrades, or you can just get the money back, whatever you want to do. But that's the process I would suggest to you.
Okay.
So Dave, we've always used a CM at risk, and there's, like, when we did the Arts and Science building, we got 300 and some change back from the project. To Michael's point, we were anticipating having water issues with a lot of our peers, and we did not. And so that money just went to build a parking lot that extends all the way down to the field house.
Okay.
And so
I'd forgotten
we've-
that, actually, yeah.
Yeah, so we've always used a CM at risk, because until he takes that out the bid, and even when he does, we still can reject all those bids. So we get the numbers back and it's not within our budget, and we have to wait another year to fund that project, then we can reject all those bids and go back from scratch.
Okay.
And at any time during that process, we will always look at all those bids submitted from their subs, whether it's the millwork, concrete guys, whatever it is, and then we can pick and choose kind of which ones we want to use. And occasionally you'll get savings from that as well.
The other thing I'll say to that too is the other advantage of having one of these contractors on board early is they will price it several times as we're going through the drawings. So let's say we get in the middle of doing our drawings and the numbers are just really wonky. You could decide then, we don't want to go on with this because the market's too weird, we'll do it, and then you're not paying for the other half of our work. Because you can stop us at any time that you would want to as well.
Okay.
You mentioned a few minutes ago you're working with another school, All Saints, I believe?
All Saints Episcopal in West Fort Worth.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. I'm curious, have any of the schools you've worked with had a construction project include a performance bond for the construction?
Yes, like an ISD will typically do that because of the public nature of the ISD. And then somebody like All Saints, and we haven't talked about this yet because we're at the exact same stage we
Yeah.
are here. It's funny going to these meetings. It's not funny because you're grappling with the same challenges that they are. They also have modulars on campus that they'd like to get rid of, and you're grappling with many of the same ideas. It would be maybe, I don't want to say fun because that's not the right term, but it might be helpful for you guys to share kind of intel with each other because you would find you're grappling with some of the same problems. Happy to facilitate that if you'd like to do that.
So for all of our projects, we require our contractors to do performance, maintenance, and payment bonds. That's with most of all of our projects, depending on the dollar amounts. So a project this size, yes, we require that.
Which is not unusual with a municipality.
Yeah.
So
So we do a 2-year maintenance bond, and then we have a performance and a payment bond as well, because what a lot of people don't understand, a payment bond, I'm not sure how you guys, none of those work, but yeah, I mean, somebody can drop their materials and the sub doesn't pay, and then, somebody's got to pay for that.
Yeah. So it sounds like we have a policy for that?
It's what we practice.
Okay.
Yep.
Good.
But in the case of All Saints, if they, and again, we're not even close to the point of making that decision yet, but there's one contractor they've worked with on several projects. I could see them maybe saying, we want to waive that bond and save that money because they're a private institution, they could do that.
Okay.
They may not want to because much like you guys, a lot of the funds to pay for this are going to be raised through donations. And so they're going to feel a fiduciary responsibility to protect that money
Yeah.
as well. So those are some of the things we'll talk about if we go on with it. It's a good discussion.
We'll go ahead and look at scenario 3. In this scenario, this is looking at additions to the art and science, the PYP, and the secondary school. So I went ahead and pulled this up so we can see both of those. The PYP edition there is in blue, and then the art and science and secondary school editions there are shown in red. So in this particular scenario, this meets the immediate needs for art and science, like we just talked about. This option is one that does give the ability to increase student capacity and accommodate growth. I'll just kind of reiterate that from scenario 2, that you do have a significant amount of built space that is now added to campus, but it doesn't increase your population at all. It maintains your existing student population. So this scenario gives you that ability to increase your student capacity. It frees up the other classrooms to improve efficiency on campus. The modular classrooms are not used as classrooms, but the existing portables could be available to be used still for office or storage or other needs on campus. The art and science addition can be smaller in this case. We don't have to look at a 2-story addition because all it needs to meet the needs of are the art and science spaces, and we're not looking at general purpose classrooms going into that space. Instead, those are being located within the PYP and secondary buildings. And then in this scenario, you're obviously investing money in permanent buildings on campus. Obviously, the biggest con of this option is that the funding is not currently available for this amount of construction.
But Emily, one other thing that I feel like might be a con is we build a 1-story arts and science building, then we blow our chance to ever have 2 stories on, and we're limited on space. I mean, it's like Manhattan, we got to build up. You know what I mean?
And I think some of that leads to the question about goals going forward, because in looking at this scenario, this was developed based upon the growth that could be achieved within this option. So if you are looking at a different growth model or looking to try and achieve more significant growth in the future, then yes, looking at how that could be added in a different way would be an important part of it.
I think it would, I think it'd be a bad decision to build a one-story structure in one of the few locations where we could build a two-story structure, and it makes sense. I mean, we can always look down the road on these other structures, but if we got a chance for a two-story structure with limited land, I think we'd be foolish not to do it.
You know, here's an idea. You raise a good point. When we did the upper school building, we designed it in such a way that you can just add classrooms on that upper end there where the red is. The stairs are already designed to work. The elevators there, the restrooms are there. You're simply adding more classrooms. So you could take that same kind of strategy with the art and science building, is go ahead and build a two-story piece that has the elevator, has the stairs, has all that stuff, and then you just build a couple more classrooms on one end of it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that might be a way to go ahead and sort of reserve your expansion footprint for a later day.
Yeah.
Roughly in this grand plan, what would be the cost of the grand plan? Ballpark? With all the upper field, the middle one, the back?
But that's also the grand plan with the single-story arts and science, correct?
Right.
Yeah, and it's
Okay,
not
so we might want to
it's not gonna
revisit that.
appreciably be different. You're gonna have some more money for stairs and elevators. It's gonna be the big thing. You'll spend less money for foundations and roof, and so there'll be some trade-off there. So you might think about it being, I don't know, 5 or 10% maximum premium on that. So it's not enormous. I would say probably closer to 5 even. But Troy, what's your thought? You're closer to the
As
numbers.
far as the cost,
All three of these little buildings, like if the town were to ever go big, right, what would the upper end big be? 40 million?
probably close to that.
And that would just add, that looks to add 35,000 square feet, 40,000 square feet? Is that what that is? I don't know.
Do you have the breakout plans for the secondary building and the PYP? And I guess, just looking at it a slightly different way, let's just pretend all three of these were vital pieces at some point in time. Does the arts and science expansion still make sense as the first phase? Or does an expansion in PYP coming before that make sense to kind of build up capacity and then absorb it in the higher years?
That's a great
So-
point.
So David, the intent of the extension of the A&S was to meet those immediate needs of science and art. Certainly, if you look at capacity of the school, if you're interested in growing the school, a little bit different model from the standpoint, not only would you have to build classrooms, but now you're looking at potentially maybe having a squeeze on your dining facilities as well.
Right.
And so, my thought would be, we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. But that's another challenge we have, is that dining piece, which you don't see in here. But the expectation is where the portables are today, you could remove the portables and put your dining facility there. But you can't remove the portables until you gain classroom space, either through the A&S or through the extension of the secondary building. So it's kind of a little tricky thing when you're landlocked like this.
Right. No, I appreciate that for sure. But I mean, if we were, because I feel like one of the frustrating components is the fact that, over the years, we kind of see this same plan come back to council, and it kind of gets hashed around, kicked back out, and then kind of nothing gets done. And I know funding is obviously a massive component, and none of us want to run the risk of kicking this back out and saying, well, look, can you just put together this beautiful, perfect master plan and show us what to do on a phase-by-phase basis? But assuming we need to create classroom space to free up area for an additional dining hall or a larger dining hall, I guess I go back to my original question, is the arts and science, is that going to be the most impactful? Or should we be looking at either the secondary building expansion to absorb some of that classroom impact, or I'm assuming PYP is not going to alleviate the portables, so.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I would ask Mr. Wilson, the head of school, what is his immediate need?
Right.
Is it still the science and the art pieces?
Right.
Because I think that's a pretty critical question.
Do we have a schematic of the secondary building proposal here? And do we have any sort of ballpark? I know you, Mayor, questioned what the global project would look like, but what would a secondary building expansion look like on a cost basis?
So the information that we had available on this, I do not have blow-ups like I do for the art and science, because that's the one most specifically recently that we've been working through the floor plans for based on that scope. For the secondary school building, though, when the building was originally constructed, it was constructed and intended to have that addition or the option for that addition in the future. So we do have, schematic plans available of what that intent was for at that time, which was just looking at classroom expansion. I think Michael made mention that, we already had restrooms and egress addressed within the existing building. And so that was just looking at some typical classroom expansion based upon what was there today. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to mean that the needs would be strictly general classroom. It could be that there's other needs that would need to be evaluated for what would go within that footprint. But what has been looked at today was based on looking at overall classroom, typical general classroom growth.
But you could substitute an art room, you could substitute some labs in
Right.
that building instead of those general classrooms.
But that would change the construction cost per square foot
It would.
to accommodate some of
Yeah.
those needs.
The way it was originally planned, that would be, like I said before, that would be the absolute cheapest building of all these things that you could do.
It would.
There's very little plumbing, very little of, there's no.
Do you
vertical-
have just a ballpark estimate of what, because you're saying here 11 general classrooms, life skills classroom, 2 offices and storage. What do you think the square foot of that versus the arts and science, and how can we just ballpark what a theoretical cost might be?
So we have the costs, when we looked at this back in 2020 and 2021, I think early 21, this was part of what the contractor that works through the pricing with Troy and our team did do some high-level pricing for. And so that was where we had that confirmation that, yes, we're looking at a more effective, cost-effective construction for those spaces. I don't recall right now what those specifically were, but that is information that we could pull back out based on what we were looking at the time in 2021. Obviously, like Michael said, we've had a more volatile market as it relates to construction costs, so that would be somewhat different than today, but that would be the most recent pricing that looked at what that was being proposed as.
So, I mean, Mayor, I don't know what your thoughts are, but it sounds like, we're potentially looking at either an arts and science expansion or a secondary building expansion, and a lot of this would depend on what Mr. Wilson may feel would be the most immediate needs. And if this could help alleviate the need for the portables, and then, as Troy said, provide, space to ultimately construct a dining hall facility, it kind of feels like in a phased manner this might be, a potential way to look at this.
Of course.
So I'm not quite sure how we move forward, but it would seem like if we could do a best side-by-side comparison of these first 2 buildings and have adequate input.
And that's what we're really from our standpoint, that's what we're hoping to help you do, is narrow down the options so we can get you, because you're asking a lot of great detailed questions. Now we can go back and dig into that little bit of detail to figure that out and show you what those plans are and that sort of thing. I think that's.
And do you, for the secondary building, do you think the theoretical time frame would be comparable to what you said for the arts and science?
I think that could be faster myself. The only hesitation I put there is it's a steel frame building, and so steel sometimes is taking a little long nowadays. So again, we would just rethink that to like order the steel first thing almost. And so we'd have to think through some strategies like that. But I could see that being faster than the others because there's, like I said, with the large arts and science footprint, you got to relocate some utilities that, because where the arts and science building was originally going to be a small black box. And so, there are things like that have to be accommodated. You don't have that in this upper school edition. So I could see that being, except for the PYP edition, that would definitely be the fastest thing.
So from the budget retreat in 2021, the estimated cost of the secondary building was about 8.8 million for those 15 classrooms, and then the admin and the PYP extension was roughly about 5 million. And those are 2021 estimates.
Okay. So
you might escalate that 10%.
Right.
So when is so obviously I know the mayor well enough to know that he's going to want to keep the portable replacements on the theoretical agenda for next school year. So how quickly do you think we could get an analysis back of these two building proposals, just a high level, just better in-depth analysis, but potentially preserve our ability to replace 3 of these portables in time for the new school year?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the portables, it's going to be a feature that we're going to have to do no matter what. And I think Sean will tell you that we're going to have swing space, and it'll be our swing space for some time. So in my view, the portables are a necessary evil. And my fear on the current portables is they're so dilapidated. Like, I personally would like to spend some money to ensure safety, and the kids dread going into the portables. I mean, and that's less, teachers do too. And everyone's got stories up here. We all have kids. And so, to me, in my view, replacing the old portables is the first step of many steps. Because I'm going to need that space as I'm swinging around with everything else. And then, Sean had talked about things in the past of how we do the school. Do we grow the PYB more? And we have a natural attrition. And so as we go up, kids leave for various reasons, and the school becomes more IB oriented. Because, over time, we're finding that through MIP and DP, kids are coming in later, and you have to spin them up into the IB world. And so,
I mean, I got just two thoughts on this. I understand where you're coming from. Obviously, if we were to forego the replacement of the portables, we have another 1.3 million, give or take, that we could dedicate towards something more permanent. But the other one is, without the benefit of this perfect master plan, whatever it is, if we were to replace 3 portables with something, newer, that's obviously going to have a 20-plus year lifespan, I assume. Are we preventing ourselves from using that space to put in a dining hall facility or something else, or can they be moved theoretically and repositioned elsewhere on campus?
You can move them.
Okay.
The challenge usually in moving them is the utilities. That they still have to have plumbing and all that kind of business. And so
Okay.
that's really the challenge. All Saints is doing exactly that. They also have some modular buildings that we're having to move. It's the exact same conversation. We're having to move them, and then they're having to run utilities to where it's going to be. And they're having to do the same thing. They're having to sort of piecemeal through stuff. Because you're right, it will be a multi-phased kind
Right.
of process.
And just to dovetail off David's comments there, the modular buildings, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that their lifespan is actually closer to 90 years because of the quality of the construction for the modular buildings. Is that true?
Troy's better. Troy's been really.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
addressing
modular
that.
buildings, based on how they're maintained, if they're set directly on dirt or concrete, so it just depends how you set them up and
And the
maintain them.
walls and-
Yeah, right. So their lifespan can be anywhere from 12 to 18 years, just, if you maintain them correctly and that sort of thing. So it can go longer, certainly.
It's a side, non-building question. On that retention pond that you look at, like, couldn't we move the retention pond and put like a soccer field there and make a track around the other field?
It's which, do you mean the one on the left or the
Right,
one?
the one on the right.
The one on the right. It's funny you say that because we were having a little pre-meeting about this and we were talking about exactly that retention pond. the
Like,
other
we could
day.
talk to Hillwood. They have cows across the way. I'm sure they want water.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
They come to my house. My house is right there.
Oh, is it?
And my lawn, water comes off the edge and the whole herd comes over. And so there's a need for it.
that's fun for your kids.
Sure, it is.
Uh,
So, but I mean, that could be a soccer field, and we could cannibalize the other 2 fields and put a track and field. We have the money for that right
We
now.
were talking about doing something else with that pond because
Sure.
your real estate's so valuable.
I know.
We were talking about doing, I don't know if a soccer field would fit there, but we could try it and see. Because we were talking about actually reconfiguring that roadway network a little bit. in
You
order
mean the
to-
dead man's curve?
Yeah, to be able to, not that roadway. Originally, I don't know if you knew this, Odger Road came straight through between the pond and the campus.
Oh, really?
Odger, and you can still see kind of the ghost of it right there at the top.
Yeah.
And so Odger came straight through. I don't know why, but the decision was made to create Damon's Brook. But-
There's several of them on that road, and one by the cemetery, too.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that one's even sharper than
Yeah.
this one is.
So, but I mean, optimally wise, there's some really valuable real estate up in the top there. We have a donor who has offered money for a track and field. If I can move like a soccer field over there, I mean, I don't know what the square footage is in terms of acreage. If I have to move a little bit of a road, I could put a track and field on the back end and then have a really nifty
When we
little.
come back
two
here, We'll
fields
have that as an
combined.
option to look at.
Yeah, sure.
We were looking at it from future building expansion.
Or that even too. I'm just saying, I always wondered about that retention pond. I was like, it's on the top of a hill.
It was never made correctly, and I'm not sure why it was needed, but it was never made correctly, so it's always leaked, I think. Troy, you probably know the history of that.
Yeah, it currently, we don't know if the groundwater's leaking just through the pressure of the pond, but we've done some preventative measures to prevent from leaking, but it still leaks.
And the funny thing about it is Hillwood's always hated it because it took the runoff and it actually, in their view, kind of muddied up their pond, which
It
is
does.
further down the hill. So they would be so happy if you got rid of it.
We should talk to them. Actually, the natural pond is by the corner of my house. If you look at the maps,
Yeah.
in the back corner, that's where the water all runs to, or it runs the other way.
Gravity always wins.
And so, it does.
Gravity
I always wondered about that pond. I'm like, why did we have a 2-acre retention
It was
pond?
it was a creation, and I don't remember where that came from.
Give me a name. We'll fire him right now. I'm kidding. I'm joking.
Hey, can I ask you real quick, on all these plans, parking, we have an issue, parking. How's that factored into this growth?
And that's something where we looked at, that's one of the reasons we were talking about.
That's what
To
I.
be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because when you look at where the pond in that area is,
Yeah.
it's not ideal from an academic connectivity point of view.
Yeah.
It's kind of on the other side of the campus. And so we were looking at it as a parking opportunity
Okay.
as much as anything else.
That's what, every time I drive by there, I think of that as well.
Yeah, and that used to be used kind of as temporary parking, I don't know if you still
Still
use
is.
that, so. But there are things like that we think that property would maybe get a little bit more intensively used. One of the other things that I would suggest to you that we could do to help with parking is come along some of the roads and just pave kind of a little apron on the side so that cars could pull up on that, and you could get a whole series of like parallel parking for events and things like that, that would let you kind of take advantage of.
Yeah, we have, I don't know if you've been out there at the end of school, it's quite the dilemma for the kids that drive trying to get out because the only road's through PYP, that design is,
Yeah,
it's tough.
yeah, that is tough.
And
We should-
we do have a plan to kind of mitigate some of that, and that's widening that drive right in front of the PYP building that was proposed, I think, this last budget cycle.
Okay.
So that would allow 3 lanes to be there, but one would be a passing lane as those cars would queue up.
So you're saying, well, we don't get into
Yeah,
detail.
so just real quick, just to do a time check, it's 5:30,
Yeah.
and we've got another item, but you guys, it's y'all's
Just-
priority.
I just had 2 quick thoughts here. It sounds like from this conversation that we know 2 things. The head of school, Sean Wilson, wants to make sure the 3 oldest portables are removed as soon as possible and we have replacements. So that spells to me new modular buildings, at least replace the 3 oldest portables. And then 2, we're going to need some type of portable and modular building as a swing space as we go through a series of construction projects in the next several years. So I'm wondering if option 2 should include modular buildings. You know what I mean? Or are we going to decide today on just one option?
We're going to talk modular next.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Well,
So-
I think it comes back to what direction arts and science versus a secondary building expansion. And just so we don't lose valuable time, I don't know if, Mr. Wilson, you have any input, or if this is something that, can you guys come back to council with better feel for which, if we try to take on something next year in terms of getting it funded and designed out, could you help us to,
Prioritize?
So my only concern with the secondary is, will we have the arts and science space within that building, and can that happen? And would that not add or take away or detract from the addition to the arts and science?
Okay.
That would be my main concern, because if we're just adding classrooms, we're not really doing the justice needed to, in terms of the sciences and the arts of what happens at West Lake.
then should we just move forward with the arts and science and just see?
Yeah, I think we
Let's
should.
just do that. Let's not waste time.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a priority.
I agree.
Sure.
I just wanted to hear from Sean first, just
Yeah.
to.
Agree.
I mean, we're like,
Agree.
we're
Yeah.
picking out what he's eating.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That sounds good.
So what's the next step?
I was going to say,
Just-
There's one more option.
one more scenario.
Oh, we were
Wait,
done.
there's more.
Yeah, well, this one was a bad one because it says, well, what if you relocated some of the campus off-site? And this was just sort of saying, out
Well,
of the box.
we've talked about that, obviously with sports, it
Yeah.
becomes an issue.
And security, it's a humongous area. So I think,
Complexity.
I think we could skip this one.
Yeah.
For now, we can skip it, yeah.
Well, we're just trying to be sure we.
Sure.
we-
Thank you.
So Troy, is direction needed from council just to start advancing the arts and science proposal?
Yes, sir. So what we're hearing is to go ahead and try to fine tune some of the pricing as it relates to the secondary building, the primary years extension, and then also the A&S as well, to get updating cost on all those
Oh, yeah.
buildings, to kind of see where that lies and what we'd have to do to move forward on those.
I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
And then we'll also look at the pond area for potential use for that, whether it be parking, sports.
That's outstanding.
Whatever it may be.
I mean, we could talk to Hillwood and just say, listen, there's plenty of, that pond is the top of a hill.
Yeah.
Like, gravity is fighting you every day.
Right. Well, we'd have to look at all the runoff from the front of the PYP, the PYP 1 building, the PYP 2 building, all the runoff from the roofs go into that pond.
Yeah, I was remembering,
So-
Troy, as I was trying to remember why it was there, I think it
Yeah.
was created for irrigation.
Yes, and so we currently irrigate from that pond. So there's a pump that you see there that we irrigate around the primary buildings that were initially created in 2003.
So to stay on point, we're talking about Arts and Science Building and replacing the 3 oldest portables.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's our focus, right?
yeah, we are.
Okay.
The other is just a collateral thought, that's what it is. But yeah, I mean, something to look at for the future.
You want more cows in your backyard.
I know, I like the cows.
When you move one piece, then it could factor into moving the others, and it becomes a bowl of spaghetti, so to speak.
I'm with you. All right, you guys got clear direction from us now?
Yeah, and we'll come back to you. You probably don't need, again, this month, right? So we'll come back to you.
Yeah, we have an executive session in 2 weeks, but yeah, we're probably in January when we're
Yeah,
back.
give us till January.
Right.
We'll come back to you with an exact date.
I think it's January 30th, Amy, is that right?
Fine-tune that.
So,
Well,
Thank you.
let's plan on maybe into January.
Thank you so much.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk portables.
Oh, and by the way, if you just want to brainstorm with the All Saints people, I'd be more than happy. And they'd
We
probably
should do
enjoy it.
that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that might be, because you're facing so many
Yeah.
of the similar kind of challenges, that I'll set that up through Troy.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Always learn something.
We're going to pull up a presentation real quick. So let's talk portables. So in your packets, you had some information as it relates to the base cost. We got 2 proposals, one from Ramtech and one from Mobile Modular. And so we'll kind of talk through those. And so really what we're looking for today is some direction. Do we want to go ahead and move forward with removing the older portables and replacing them with new? Get your blessing on the floor plan, and also we'll talk a little bit about funding sources and estimated budgets. So the key piece to this is, in order to get those new modular buildings by August, we're going to have to put down 25% with whatever vendor we choose by the end of the month, end of December, in order to lock our place in the assembly line to get those built, to get them removed, get the old ones removed, and get the new ones put in. So it's about a 2-month process when you talk about power, water, as well. So giving us the ability to start negotiating that with those vendors, and we can bring something back to the council on the 19th, if that's the direction. So you guys have seen the floor plan. It includes 6 classrooms, restrooms, some office space, and these portables are all enclosed. In other words, today you have the wooden deck in between the 3 buildings. This would all be enclosed. So that's generally what the floor plan looks like.
And these are all 1,500 square feet roughly? How big?
Each classroom, I believe it says on there, about 700 square feet.
Okay.
So they're replicating what we have today as far as square footage. They're about the same size as the classrooms that are in the secondary building.
And these here, the HVACs are depicted again on the wall.
Yes, and so what we've asked them to do is, right now you walk in those portables and the AC unit is on one wall and it cranks up and then that's all that heats. We're going to have it actually duct, so you're going to have just like you would in a normal classroom, and that would reduce some of the noise, but it's not going to eliminate it all. So you'll get better circulation in there as well.
Could you have the HVACs like a house set off to the side on?
That would be an upgrade, and we'd have to negotiate that with them, but it definitely will impact that base price.
And so, I mean, I don't want to replicate what I have now.
Right.
I want to fix fire, I want to fix safety. I don't want
Sure.
to be like, oh, it's a new HVAC, it vibrates less.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to get less noise because that's going to be duct into the classroom, and you may have 2 to 3 ducts in that classroom for that supply air.
And then for windows too, the whole point of the school was lighting. There's got to
Right.
be a module setup where there's windows.
Right, and we can change those windows because it'll be a brand-new portable, and we can customize those, whether it's the long horizontal windows or it's just your standard 3x4 window, which you'll see a picture of that. So we can add those windows in addition to, or redesign that, but it becomes more of a custom product, but it's definitely available to do.
I'd like to look at that. I think those are the major issues of the portable. Kids dread going in
Certainly.
there because it's like a dark room.
Right.
And so,
No, can definitely understand that. So if we're looking at our base cost on these with Ramtech, what they had submitted was about $730,000 and some change, along with the SkyTrack. The SkyTrack is used to remove the existing portables and put the new ones, because when you surgically, you got to do that because we have some utilities in place, and so it prevents from damaging that. So their base cost total is $733,340. And then some enhancements or some options would be to add some, right now we have the metal coverings on them now, and so they'd put more of a hardy look, and I've got a picture of that, and we can go through that.
And what would that be sitting on? Is that a slab or is that on
It
piers?
would be sitting on the current ground that we have now. Now, when we did that, we compacted that soil, we sloped it so the water would drain downhill. The challenge of building on that campus is the topography. It's not on any type of a concrete right now, so they just put blocks, and we checked those to see if there's any movement. I think it was about 2 years ago they came out and reset some of those blocks for us as well. So right now it'd be sitting right on the ground.
would it be better to put it on concrete?
It would be better, certainly.
Obviously, it's another $100,000 more.
Yeah, there's a cost associated with
But
that.
if we ever want to move them in the future?
I mean, you can tear up
Yeah,
concrete.
then you got the demolition, and then the plumbing has to be run through the concrete slab as well. It's
But
just like-
in terms of maintaining the moisture and everything, if you have concrete on the ground,
Does it preserve the light? I mean, to
yeah,
add.
it adds lifespan to it, right?
I'm not sure it's going to preserve that much of the lifespan because you have ventilation underneath those portables, so those skirts, they have holes in it, so that you constantly have wind circulation underneath those. Certainly, putting it on a concrete slab would be the best option if that's something we wanted to spend the money on. But to your point, we'd have to go and demo all that at the end of the day when it came time to remove them, and so that just adds to the cost as well.
This is not my monkey in this case.
Right.
But not my zoo, but I would speak against doing the slab because your soil is so expansive here that it swells and shrinks a lot. And so if you have plumbing coming through that and the slab swells and shrinks, you could break your plumbing, which then causes a huge mess under your portable. So I would tend not to do at least all of it. If you did some of it on a slab, but I wouldn't do all of it where the plumbing is.
I mean, could you do the edge perimeter? You see that with some buildings where there's like a 3 foot around,
Yeah, you can
and then you
just
put
make
your stilts on it, and so therefore, it's not a complete slab, but
Right.
it maintains the balance.
Certainly. I mean, we can have our engineers look at that and see what type of footers are needed to support that weight
Sure.
as well. So we certainly can do that. You had the option of wooden decks versus metal. Metal's a lot more expensive. Wooden decks are less noisier, so we kind of went with the wooden option as what we currently have. The upgrading and flooring, we put a price in there so that right now, if you go in some of the portals, they have the VCT tile, which is the 12 by 12 tile. In portable buildings, over time, you'll see those tiles start, because you have some movement in those portables, start separating. We kind of did a floor in the life skills room, that portable that runs east-west with more of a rubberized floor, which gives you a higher quality feel inside the portables, as well as it kind of helps with some of the noise, and that's held up very well. But it's also pretty expensive to do. So we looked at that as an upgrade. Canopies, of course, we have canopies today. This includes canopies as well to all the exits from the offices as well as to the north side of the building.
Troy, can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
I mean, ultimately, all of our goal, I believe, as a city or town, sorry, I always got to work on that, is we ultimately want the portables gone. I mean, is there not a gently used market that would be substantially less for these buildings, since ultimately we're trying to phase them out within probably the next 5 years, 10 years?
They're tough to find, and I've asked that question to both our vendors, and they are, portable buildings are somewhat of in a shortage because because of the inflation market and the price of building buildings.
But that's like the new car salesman not wanting to let you know there's some good used cars on the lot
Very
that you
true.
get paid on.
Yeah, we certainly can pursue that.
I think
Certainly
we
can.
should, because
But we're going-
ultimately, we don't want these things 20 years from now. You know what I mean?
Right.
I
And-
don't think any of us do.
And that was the reason we bought used ones to begin with, thinking we wouldn't have them here for long periods of time. So we,
14 years.
so we can certainly
I mean,
pursue that. But
Because
we're
we
under
kind of got a
time-
gun to our head on this one. We got to make a decision this month.
Right.
But I think it'd be prudent to look at, and I could be 1,000% wrong. I mean,
Sure.
there could be nothing on the market. I don't
Right.
know.
Right.
But I think we should look, I mean, if we had a really good, we're looking for 3, right?
Right.
We had 3 affordable ones that could be more money for permanent structures.
Sure. We can definitely pursue that, for sure.
Are you guys feeling similar? or-
Yeah, for sure.
No, of course.
I mean, it's like saving money on the apartment that you're renting, so you get more money for a down payment on a nice house.
Oh, no, totally understand. Totally understand. We were looking to get a new portable buildings, and that was the direction I was given at the time, so
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank
we
you
can-
for that. Thanks for
We can
research.
pursue that, for sure. So the second proposal we got was for Mobile Modular. Theirs came in at about $758. Their setup costs were kind of the difference as far as what they charge to do the blocking and setting. So their total came up to be about $804 and some change. And then there's their cost for metal and canopies and wood decks and upgrades to the floor, as well as the upgrade to the siding. Now let's talk about the site. So what do we got to do to that site to kind of prepare it? The first thing we got to do is we got to remove the old portables. The good news is we'll get $7,500 for those old portables, old modulars, I should say. And then with the power hookups, the plumbing, we got ranges on those because really what the contractors needed is they needed some MEP drawings that would be supplied by the vendor that we choose. And so we've got some price ranges there for all of these things. IT data, that's switches, phones, all those things that go into those classrooms, monitors, smart boards, fiber that needs to be run because we're going to have to move that location as well. Fire alarm system, that's all your horn, strobes, and panels. Sprinkler system as well. So that's getting the base cost includes the sprinkler system inside the building, but I've got to get a line from the main water line up to the building to supply that water for that system. So that's what that cost is. Landscaping arranged there because obviously if we're going to landscape around the newer portables, we're going to have to upgrade what's around the set that's going to stay. So that includes that. Security equipment if we're going to replace the cameras or may add some additional cameras based to the new configuration. And then also that contingency. So that contingency will include anything from fire extinguishers to PA, just things that come up, door reading systems, all those things that may come up that we're just not thinking of, or if you have a price difference, all of a sudden it comes in as well. So that kind of gives you that total or that range of about $265 to about $349 just to get the site prepared. And so using Ramtech as the example, their base costs, the additional options and site work, that project would come in of roughly about $1.2 million just for those 3 modular buildings.
Troy, so it looks like there's a price differential, give or take $100,000 between these two groups. Just between these two, did you see much of a difference in terms of product quality, design? Did you get a better feel for one group? And then just to finish out the question, let you run, why these two, and should we go broader? I mean, it's a big market out there. So.
Right, it is. These two folks have been in the area for a long time. I've seen some of their products. They sent me a lot of examples. We checked their references. And so I feel like they bring a very good product. We used a company, and I won't mention their name, on the first buildings, and it went okay, but they just really didn't understand the quality we wanted. And so you've got to be pretty selective with these mobile building providers on make sure that they put out quality products. So that's why I selected Ramtech and Modular.
But they're also on the approved Texas.
Yeah, so both of them are members of the buy board, so that gives us, it qualifies us so we don't have to go through the full bid process as well.
But are we just going for the cheaper option, or did you see a notable difference between even
I
these
don't
two
think we'll
groups?
see the notable difference as it relates to quality
Okay.
in either one of these vendors. I think we're going to get a quality product, whichever vendor we choose.
Okay.
And do they have any warranties? Like-
They'll have some warranties on the HVAC systems, so there'll be some of that. That's things that we still need to negotiate as well. So the next slide, whoops, whoa. So the next slide, this is kind of a layout. You see your existing three that are separated buildings. A single building is where your blue perimeter is, and so you can see it moves to the north a little bit as well, so it is a little bit larger footprint, but that would be the location. And then to give you some challenges that we have, we would look at, there was a canopy price in there on the site pricing, and that would be to get a covered canopy from the location where our current portables are to the existing portables that would not be replaced. And so we'd have a covered walkway from the portable buildings to portable buildings.
And is that where the decking is proposed to go as well?
Some of the decking may go there, yes.
Where else does the decking go?
So it goes out all your exits. So if you go back to the floor plan, you have the offices on one side, and so that would be your south side. So that whole section would be all decked because you have so many doors. You have your exit door out your main hallway, and then you'd have a deck on the north side of the building as well because you've got to stay in compliant with ADA. So you're going to have to create a ramp or a switchback ramp, depending how it falls out.
According to that design, the offices have no HVAC?
I'm sorry?
The offices on that map do not have any HVAC?
No, they will have HVAC.
Okay.
So if you look at the classroom building, that dotted line that goes in between there, those are your two buildings sandwiched together. So
Okay.
you've got 1, 2, 3, and then the restrooms in the office, again, is that building. So your HVAC system,
It's not depicted on there, though.
right, but it would be there.
Okay.
So if you look at on your restrooms, you have right outside your restrooms, you have the unit on the lower side and also on the upper side, because if you recall, it's all going to be duct. And so those units would feed that office space.
So after working with both companies, do you have a preference that one you prefer working with?
I would go with Ramtech. Their engineer came out on site and kind of surveyed the site for us as well. And I haven't worked with them in the past, but I think, from what I can tell, they put out quality products. And so when you talk about siding and upgrading our siding, if you notice this is more flat, it's called the Hardy siding. It's not as rigid as we have today with the metal. And so that would be your difference there. And you can see the ramps. You see a single entry point on the lower side, and they put the flower beds and the rose bushes and all those type things to kind of help spruce those up as well. Any questions or comments?
Not right now. And so you need us at the next meeting to give us a decision, right, on the 19th, right?
Right. I mean, by the 19th, we got to make the decision. So where I need direction tonight is, are we okay with the proposed budget to move forward with the portables? Because we're going to have to put down that 25% probably shortly after the 19th.
What are you going to bring back on the 19th?
We'll go back and narrow down all those options.
Okay.
So we'll
So
take
that-
out the metal, we'll add some additional windows.
So you bring back your proposal and walk us through it on the 19th?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
But
And,
I'd also like to see a used, and maybe
Sure.
there's nothing out there, but
okay.
Yep.
And in terms, just go to the mayor's point on windows and optionality, can you expand a little on the optionality by that time, do you think?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we'll get with the vendor and see what they can turn around for us.
Okay.
And
what
maybe
our
not have
options
the
are.
HC on the wall. Eventually, that vibrating is going to come off the wall.
Right.
Vibrations work against you.
Like gravity.
It's gravity. You'll eventually lose that one.
Yeah.
you know.
So that's when we'll come back on the 19th to get approval to go ahead and move forward with that. But we'll create those options from used to ACs in windows as well,
Okay.
and hone in on those, for
I
sure.
appreciate it. Thank you.
All right?
Thank you very much for all your work.
All right, let's
Thank
take
you,
a quick
Troy.
10-minute break before the next meeting. The meeting starts at 6. That'll be the end of the work session at 5:51.